or design a site and all that. Web to lead, yeah. So these are the things that we discussed in our last session. And before that, we were on triggers, right? And I told you that we are going to discuss more on Apex maybe in the next session, right? So coming back to Apex now. For Apex, we have different ways of invoking Apex, right? And two ways of invoking Apex that we have seen so far are visual, through a visual force page and through a trigger, right? Now there are a few more concepts on Apex which I want you to understand, right? So first thing that I want you to understand is so when we say ways of invoking Apex, there are two ways of invoking Apex. One is synchronous, second is asynchronous. Alright, so one is a synchronous and the other is asynchronous. Now synchronous is as the name suggests, it is in sync with the some other thing happening, right? Maybe like something which an apex which gets invoked when a button is clicked. Okay, so that is on in sync with that particular action happening. Or when I talk about an apex getting executed when a record is saved, instantly there is an apex invoked. So that is in sync with the DML, right? So that is synchronous. Yeah, trigger is synchronous. So whatever we do on the page, that is synchronous. Okay, so that is in sync with the user action, that is in sync with the DML operation happening. So that is all synchronous apex. Okay. Now what is asynchronous then? Asynchronous is something which is not, the apex which is not in sync with some end user action happening. Okay. So how is that possible, or how does that happen? For example, you want some apex to run in the backend. Okay. You want some apex to run in the backend, let's say every Friday. Okay, you define that. Okay, every Friday I want this code to get executed. Now there on Friday it should automatically run, so asynchronously. So there will not be, no one will come and click on a button on Friday. Asynchronously it should run in the backend. Okay. So that can be one example, right? So these asynchronous apex are basically the apex codes which run in the backend automatically. Okay. And there are several ways of asynchronous apex, invoking asynchronous apex. Okay, so I'll talk about that. So in asynchronous, one is a future method. Okay. Second is a queuable class. Third is an apex scheduler. Fourth is a batch apex. Alright, so we understand apex, right? We know what apex is. Basically, now so far what we have discussed is using the apex on click of a button. So let's say you're using an apex on a visual force page on click of a button. Now this on click of the button, what happens? When you click on the button, the apex method gets executed, whatever is associated to that button, right? So that happens synchronously or asynchronously. On click of the button, it works synchronously, right? So it usually does not happen that you click on the button and the action will happen after 2 hours. Does it happen that way? No, right? It happens instantly. Or whenever a record is getting saved. So it's not that the record is getting entered now and the action will happen sometime later or something like that, right? So usually that does not happen. However, in the synchronous apex, there can be a problem, okay? There can be an issue with the synchronous thing. For example, you clicked on a button or any action that got started, okay, either from click of a button or from a DML operation. The action got started, okay, and there is in the apex there is some action which needs to be performed, but the resources to perform that action are not available. Alright, then what will happen? That action will get cancelled, right? For example, there's a synchronous method which started getting executed, and already some other method is getting executed, and for your organization there is no more resource available to perform that action. Then what happens? Usually that action gets cancelled, right? Some error will be thrown and action will get cancelled. So to deal with that, Salesforce has a future method. Okay, so what is a future method? Future method is something, if you here you can just put add future annotation while writing the method. Okay, then what happens with this? Any method which has a future annotation, if it tries to get executed and it finds that the Salesforce resources are not available, it does not get cancelled, it just gets queued. Okay, it waits for the resources to become available, and when the resources are available, this method gets executed. Got that thing? So, yeah. So this is what the future method is. Got it? So usually, while we are talking about a synchronous method, either that method will get executed, or if the resources are not available, that will throw an error. That's it, right? Let's say your method has some record to be created. Okay, in the method I'm creating a record. Okay, and I click on the button. On click of the button, the record should get created. Now, if it's a normal method, then what happens? It will try to create the record. If it finds the resources are not available, okay. When I say resources are not available, I'm talking about certain limitations that are put from Salesforce. I will talk about those things, okay. Those are called governor limits. I'll talk about those. So, if it finds that the resources are not available, it will simply straight away get cancelled. Okay, resources are not available, could not perform the action. That is what we usually expect. Okay. However, there are certain actions which you definitely want to do now or after some time, but you do not want those things to get cancelled. In those methods, you should put an add future annotation. And this add future annotation to a method will make sure, and this is for a method. Future is basically for a method. So this will make sure that your method gets executed even after some time when the resources become available. Alright, so some other thing is happening in the backend that completes, and then your this method gets executed. Alright. Now okay. Then we have another asynchronous thing which is called queuable class. Okay, this is where you use a queuable interface. All right, so this is for the entire class. Okay, so what happens is this entire class gets queued. Here we were talking about a method. This is for the entire class. Okay. So for using this queuable interface, what we do is, while you define the class name, we say implements queuable. Okay. So this again, it's pretty similar to your future method thing, alright? And this is something which has been recently introduced last month itself. This queuable class. Future method was earlier there. Now also you have future method option. So just consider this queuable class as something which is similar to future method. Just that future method is something for method, and this is for the entire class. Okay, but this also performs the same thing. So all the methods in this queuable class will automatically go and get queued. Okay, and wait for the resources to become available. If it takes 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, they will still go and wait. Right, and when the resources become available, then those things will get executed. Okay, so that's about the future method and the queuable class. Okay, so sometimes you just want certain actions to happen when the resources are available. That is where you will use future method or queuable class. All right. Now the next is an Apex scheduler. Okay, what is Apex scheduler? Apex scheduler allows you to schedule the method. Okay, some Apex method you can run that method on a defined frequency. Let's say every Friday or every Saturday, or whatever frequency you have. All right. So here you use a schedulable interface. So you write it something like this. Okay. So you have to write it like this, while writing the class. So implements schedulable. Okay. And then you'll have to go ahead and define the schedule for that Apex class. All right. So there's something called Apex scheduler. I'll just show you that. Okay. So the advantage of Apex scheduler is that you can schedule the Apex. That okay, it should run on a Friday, or it should run on a Thursday, or this, or it should run. So that can be defined, the frequency. Remember that scheduling reports. We schedule the report part. So Apex scheduler is basically used for scheduling the Apex code. Alright. Alright. The other thing is batch Apex. What is batch Apex? Okay. What is batch effects? Batch effects is sometimes what happens is you want certain things to happen in small batches, right? Let's say you have got huge amount of data and you just want to um, execute that entire data. So instead of doing that in one single transaction, you might want to perform the same thing in small batches. All right. So that is what a batch effect is. Correct. So again, it has got to do something with the limitations, the governor limits that we are going to talk about. All right. So these are different, four different ways of asynchronous effects. Okay. So one is a future method, one is queuable class, one is apex scheduler, one is batch apex. Okay. So these are the different uh, ways of invoking apex asynchronously. Synchronously, we already have seen one is through visual force and one is through trigger. Apart from these two, which you are already aware of, there is one more which is called a anonymous code block. Okay, anonymous code block is you can you don't have to always work with a visual force or trigger. You simply want to write a code and want to execute it, you can do that. Okay, so this is something which can be done from the developer console. Okay, so this is one part of it. Now just to give you a little brief on the developer console, and then I'll come to the governor limit part of it. Okay, developer console is primarily the IDE for Salesforce. Okay, this is where you do the development stuff, right? Earlier we used to work on Eclipse. Okay, because writing code and everything on Eclipse was a lot easier as compared to writing the same on Salesforce. However, by time Salesforce has improved the user interface. So you have seen, during our training, most of the codes we have written is all on Salesforce directly. So for Visual Force, I think there is no better place than writing it directly on the interface, because it's pretty friendly. Yeah, while you're talking about writing Apex, you can write it on the interface itself, where we go and create a new class and we can write that code. So that is a good thing. Or you have a developer console option. Okay, so you can always do it on developer console. Just give me a minute. Let me show you how the developer console looks.
Jeet, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding that force.com IDE, that is Eclipse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like we can't use Sandbox for our practice, but force.com IDE we can use and check how it works. So, because I was asking this because in many in-person interviews they may ask us to code, and in real-time environment most of the times they would be using force.com IDE or Sandbox. They won't be using that developer org. So we should be familiar with that environment, right?
See, Force.com IDE and Sandbox are completely different things. Okay, so Force.com IDE in a way is it's something similar to this. I mean, that is an IDE. Okay, so that is where you can write your codes and stuff and keep things organized in that way, right? But that cannot work as an alternate to a sandbox. All right. I mean, that's for understanding. So in a company, it's not that someone works on a IDE as an alternate to Sandbox. Okay, Force.com IDE is
Yeah,
an alternate to developer console, which I will show you here. So if you
yeah,
come
because
here,
sandbox is limited with that addition or version, whatever they have, a number of sandboxes. But IDE anyone can use, any user can work on that, right?
yeah, definitely IDE, any user can work on that. That's absolutely correct. But the way
And
we work on a sandbox and the way we work on an IDE are completely different, right? So that is the thing.
yeah, actually my question was how should we get familiar with both the environments so we don't scope our interviews. We have in-person interview and we are asked to, for example, write a trigger or even a simple Apex class.
So I can just tell you about that, how to use a force.com ID also. That's not an issue, but let us talk about the developer console, and I'll just talk about the force.com ID thing also. Okay. Well,
Okay.
so now see again, as we're talking about Eclipse or a force.com ID thing. When we talk about a few years back, we used to use Eclipse for writing the code and all that stuff. Okay, but now we have developer console. So Salesforce has come up with this developer console. This is where you can write your code and all that stuff and work on those things. All right. So you can have your code written here, and you can actually check your code, test your code, and everything can be done here, right? Now this is where I was talking about using an anonymous code block. So you can write an anonymous Apex code here and then execute that. Okay, so that will get executed. Got that thing? So this is what you can use for executing an anonymous code block. Let's say account will what did we not provide?
So try creating a new content. So I'm not sure. By mistake, I have created some trigger or something. I'm not sure about. So for contact, it should work because I've used it recently.
It works, right?
Yeah, anonymous. Like the trigger which was open to count the number of contacts. It was working with the anonymous block.
Right. So that works basically. So one is again coming back to this. So developer console we have understood. So we can, you see, you can create your all Apex classes, triggers, Visual Force pages, everything can be created here. Okay, and you can check everything here. You can write your SQL queries here. Okay, you see you have a query editor here. You can write a query and you can try and execute the query, see if there is some data for something or not. Right, so it's not always that you can write the query only on the Apex class. You can write a query here. To some extent you can get your query executed and you get some data out of here. Sometimes you might want to check whether there is some data available with some particular criteria or not. Those queries can be quickly written here and all that stuff, right? So this also, developer console is also relatively new. It has been almost there for 2-3 years. Earlier it was not there, but it's a useful thing. Okay, and again, once you start writing, I mean, if you get into that habit of writing classes, triggers, and all that stuff here, you will find it, the interface more friendly in terms of writing Apex code. Okay. I do not have much habit of coming and writing things here, but you definitely, as you people are learning it now, you can definitely can have. I have a bad habit of writing it there because earlier this thing was not there. When I started writing code, so I have got into that habit. But you guys can always develop a habit of writing. Still, I feel that for visual force that is better, a lot better, because you can see the preview. Preview gives you a better thing. We continuously keep on saving and watching the preview thing. But for Apex, there is no scope for preview and all that stuff. So it's always good, you get a practice of writing it here and all. Okay. So that is one thing. Okay. So we have understood synchronous and asynchronous effects. Developer console we have understood. Now there's another thing that I was talking about, which is called a governor limit. Okay, which I want you to understand. Okay, and even before I talk about governor limit, there is one more concept that I want you to understand, which is called a transaction. So this transaction concept will also help you understand certain things. Okay, now what is an Apex transaction? Apex transaction is basically okay, an Apex transaction is basically a transaction where some data is committed to the database, okay, or it is not committed to the database. Correct? So a transaction is complete when some data is committed to the database. Got that thing? So that is what an Apex transaction is. So one transaction will have one data commitment to the database. It can be for one single record, it can be for 50 records, it can be for 100 records. Okay. Now in that transaction, usually in one transaction, either the entire data is committed or the entire data is rolled back. It's not committed. Okay. Sometimes, for example, when I say that in a transaction, either the data will be completely committed or it will not be completely committed entirely. Okay. So that is how an Apex transaction is. So, for example, in an Apex class, through an Apex method, you are trying to enter 100 records. Okay. Now, you are trying to insert them one by one using a loop. Okay. First one gets entered, second one gets entered. This way, 40 records get entered, and the 41st record has an error. Right. Now, what would happen? This entire 40 which you got entered, because the 41st has an error, all those 40 records will get rolled back. Okay. So in a transaction, as I said, either the entire set of data will get committed or the entire set of data will get rolled back. Okay. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to share a link on this Apex transaction thing for your reference. Okay, so this is something that you just need to understand. Okay, so this one line will make it a lot simpler for you people. An Apex transaction represents a set of operations that are executed as a single unit. Okay, so the set of operations which will be executed as a single unit. An DML operation in a transaction either completes successfully, or if an error occurs in one operation, the entire transaction is rolled back. So that is what a transaction is. Okay, either, so we understand what a transaction, for example, when you're doing a transaction, online transaction, either that happens or that does not happen, so it gets rolled back or something like that, right? Same thing is applicable for us also, right? Now with a transaction, basically what happens, so only thing that we need to understand is either a DML completes successfully or rolled back, which means if you're talking about 100 records to be inserted in one transaction, either all 100 of them will be inserted or nothing will be inserted, right? So that's with our usual DML operations. So what are our DML operations? Insert, update, delete. These are our usual DML. Okay. Now there's something called database.dml. Okay, so database is a custom method. Okay. So this database is a custom, not method, database is a custom class and it has methods. Okay, what we can do is we can use database methods, database DML methods to uh, do the partial in DMLs as well. Okay, for example, in a transaction, usually what is happening, so by default what happens, an insert operation, one transaction will either get completely executed or will not be executed completely, right? But we have another thing which is called a database method, sorry, database class. Here it is. So there is a class which is called database class. Okay, so this is a custom class. So usually we use our DML options, right? But there is something called database.dml also. So basically, for your understanding, database is nothing, it's a class and there are methods defined under it. So you can use something called database.insert. You see all these database methods, database, see this, there is this database class and all the methods are listed under this. So you can have insert this, that, all those stuff. Okay. So if you use a database dot insert and if you use only insert, now what do you think is the difference? This normal DML operation performs the complete transaction. Okay, so this works with the transaction concept. Either the entire data will be committed or it will be rolled back. Got it? Here you will have your partial data insert done. For example, 40 records have got created, 41st has an error. So this database dot insert will not roll back those 40 records. Got that thing? So whenever you are working in for multiple records and you are trying to perform multiple inserts in a given transaction, if you use an insert operations, simple insert operation, your entire transaction will get committed or it will get rolled back. All the records, the entire set of records will be either committed to the database or it will be rolled back. But if you use a database dot insert, then what will happen? Whatever has got inserted will not be rolled back. Simple. No difficulty understanding this thing. Right, so this is an important thing. I mean, this is something that you are asked a lot of times during your interview, and otherwise also it's good for us to know. Like, so please tell me if anyone has a question on this. And there is another mechanism that I want to talk about, just to understand how this works. Basically, what happens that we have understood. Now, just for your understanding, I also want you to understand the order of execution. I want you to understand this small thing, order of execution of a transaction. So how, let's say we are talking about inserting a record. So how does that insert of the record happens? Okay. So insert of the record happens, first of all, there are all system validations which happen. Pretty simple. Okay, so there will be system validation, then there will be all before triggers check. So if there is a before trigger error or not, whenever I'm talking about a record being inserted into the database or whatever, deleted. So first thing, there will be system validation. System validation means are you making any system validation error or not? Then if there are any before triggers, those are checked. Then custom validations are the ones that you have defined. Then your after triggers, after insert, after update, those triggers come into picture. Okay. Now once this part is done, data is created but not committed. Okay, so data is created in the table but not exactly committed. Okay, then what happens? Then there are these all OOTB functionalities out of the box. So which includes things like your workflows, assignment rule, escalation rule, all that stuff. Okay, and then finally the data is committed. Okay, So when I talk about an insert operation, usually what happens when I say that, okay, if there is a loop running in and there are 40 records which got inserted, and the 41st hasn't had an error. So in that case, what happens is, in case of an insert, what happens? One record comes, goes till here. Okay, data gets created in the database, but not committed. Okay, so temporary create happens, and then the second record comes, third record comes, fourth record comes. Okay, if all the records are okay, then finally it will go and have a the data getting committed into the database. If all the records are okay. Okay. So temporarily all the records are got here, and after that finally all the records are committed together. If there is an error in any one of those, this entire set of records will get rolled back. Okay, so from here things go back. Alright. In case of a database.insert, what happens? Every single record goes and gets committed at one point of time. So there is no possibility of that record coming back. Right. So default insert operation that we use is designed in such a way that it will either perform the entire set of records getting inserted or whatever updated, or it will roll back the entire thing. Database.insert, or we also call it database.dml. Okay, so sometimes you may have a question that what is the difference between a DML operation and a database.dml operation. Okay, what is the importance of a database class? So database class is basically used for to work as an exception to the normal transaction concept, right? So that is how it helps you. So this is not a general insert operation. This is a custom one which has been defined by Salesforce. So custom database method and custom insert method. Okay, we are clear on this. So we have by now talked about transactions and also talked about the database.dml operations and order of execution. So these are all three important things. Okay, so order of execution is also good for you to know. Okay, so just keep this thing also in mind. Okay, so we have talked about order of execution. Now once we understand these things, transactions and stuff, now let's talk about governor limit. What is a governor limit? Governor limit is a pretty simple concept. Now most of the things that we talk about in Salesforce, not most, everything has a certain limit, right? Why it has limits? Because we are on a multi-tenant environment, right? Now we need to work with our limitations, so we cannot say that we will just work on anything and we will do anything. That does not happen, right? So for example, how many objects you can create, how many fields you can create, everything comes with a limit, right? But this governor limit feature becomes more important while we are talking about the Apex, right? Because in Apex we are pretty free to write the code whatever we want. We can do anything. We can write an SQL query to fetch whatever amount of data. So that is where governor limits become a little more important, right? So that our code is under check, that whatever we have written is practically doable, not doable, and all that stuff, right? So Salesforce has defined governor limits, okay, and we need to work as per those governor limits in order to have good quality code which does not throw too many errors and all that stuff. For example, there is a limit on how many records you can retrieve through an SQL query. There is a limit on how many insert or DML statements you can execute in a transaction. There is a limit on, again I told you about one transaction and DML inside a transaction, right? Now there is a limit on how many DMLs can be executed in one transaction. Alright. There is a limit on how many SQL queries, number of SQL queries that you can execute. Okay. So for everything there is a limit. Right. So I'll share another link with you. Here it is. See, per transaction apex limit. So your apex has a limit on everything on a transaction. Total number of records retrieved by SOQL queries is 50,000. Okay. Total number of SOQL queries issued synchronously 100, asynchronous 200. Okay, so again difference. So in asynchronous, you see you have a little better option. You have a little more available option. Total number of DML statements issued 150. So you can just have 150 DML statements issued. So if you are putting your insert operation inside a for loop, that for loop you have to make sure does not run more than 150 times. Okay. Total number of records retrieved by an SOSL query. We talked about SOSL. Cannot return more than 2000 search results. Okay. So SOQL can maximum retrieve 50,000, right? So you cannot retrieve 5 million records using an SOQL query. You can maximum retrieve 50,000, all right? So this is called governor limit, all right? For everything that we do. So you have a limit on that, okay? So governor limit is basically defined for controlling the apex. Okay, and why governor limit? Because we are using a multi-tenant environment. See, understand this thing. Because apex run in a multi-tenant environment, the apex runtime engine strictly enforces a number of limits to ensure that runaway apex doesn't monopolize shared resources. So it just wants to make sure that your apex does not monopolize the resources. Okay. If some apex code ever exceeds a limit, the associated governor issues a runtime exception that cannot be handled. Alright. So basically what happens is it throws an error or it throws an exception. Okay. So if you are trying to retrieve, let's say for example, the SQL is supposed to fetch you more than 50,000 records, it will throw you an exception. It will say that this is an exception, because your SOQL query can only return 50,000 records. So we have to be clear, we have to be a little, we'll have to keep these governor limits in mind while we are writing this Apex code, okay? And we'll have to work in such a way, or we'll have to write the code in such a way that we don't hit this exception a lot of times, or not even a single time, because you don't want your end users to see exceptions and errors every time they are trying to execute the code, right? So while we write the Apex code, we need to keep certain things in mind, right? For example, if you're writing an SOQL query and you know that, okay, fine, the result can be more than 50,000 records we are talking about. So don't write an SOQL query which returns a lot of records, okay? Because in that case it will throw an exception. The method will not get executed. So try to write an SOQL query keeping in mind that your SOQL query should not return more than 50,000 records. Try to write, even if you are, it's not always advisable to put a DML operation inside a for loop. When we say that there is a limit of 150 DML statements, so usually, no one writes DML statement like insert 150 times in the code. So chances are there that you have the DML statement inside a for loop, okay, and that loop keeps on running. Now, it's advisable to keep your DML statements outside loops, okay, so that is a very good practice. Don't include DML statement inside a loop. But however, if you have to do that, if you are required to do that, then do it keeping in mind that, okay, fine, how many times that loop could run, okay? So so a loop which runs 1000 times, you put your DML statement inside that, does not help, right? Instead, try to, instead of entering one record at a time, instead of doing an insert of one single record inside the loop, you can also do what? you can put it in a list. Okay, so instead of doing this insert operation multiple times, you can just keep on putting that record in a list and perform one DML operation for the list. Okay, so inserting list is always a better option than inserting um, one single record. Fine, because you can always insert a list. Okay. The problem with the list is total number of records processed as a result of DML statements. Again 10,000. So I mean you have to keep in mind everything that okay fine what you are doing. Got it? So there is a real issue with the number of DML statements being issued, and then there is a issue with the number of records which can be executed or processed through a DML statement. So you have to just keep both the things in mind. So your list also should not grow very big, because then you will have an error from there, right? And your DMLs, usually try to avoid them and keep them outside the loop and stuff. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so there's one article, there's something on my blog itself. So this is something which will give you, fair understanding of how you can avoid some of the governor limits. Okay, bulkify a DML call means, instead of doing a DML for small, because we have a limit on how many DML statements can be issued. Instead of doing DML for small groups or maybe for 1 or 2 records, try to bulkify it. Try to do it for more records. Okay, so that is one thing that helps you, work in this way. See, in this case, first example, update operation is inside the for loop. Okay. In the second case, what we have done, we have created a list of opportunity, and we are just putting the data into the list, and one single update operation is being used. So all the records are being added to the list, and then one single update operation, so that you do not hit your governor limit easily. Alright, if you put this update operation inside your for loop, then what will happen after 150 records exception? Okay, so that is how it is. Are you okay on this? So far clear? All right. So governor limit part we understand. So it's pretty simple concept. I mean, because they are on multi-tenant, they have to put certain limits, and they have put limits on almost everything. And we have to understand these are, the basic ones, like um, how many records can be retrieved, how many records can be processed as a DML statement, how many DML statements can be issued. These are very basic things. Why do we need to understand these so well? Because this is something which you will use in almost every code. Every other code has these things. So how many SQL queries can be issued? Again, writing a SQL query inside a loop is not a very good idea. See, because for SQL query also you have a limit of 100 SQL queries on a synchronous FX method. So the point is that if you write SQL queries inside loop, sometimes we are used to writing for, and inside that we write our SQL query. So again, you will the chances are there that you will hit the governor limit. So try to keep your SQL queries outside the loop. Okay, so just be careful with what we are putting inside the loop. So that is one very good practice, because if something is outside the loop, chances are rare that you will write 100 SQL queries line by line. So that usually does not happen. But the problem is once we have written something inside the loop, that is where we hit the limit. Okay, so insert any DML statement inside the loop, not very good idea. Try to keep it outside the loop. Okay, any SQL query inside the loop, not a very good idea. Try to keep it outside the loop. That is how it is. Okay, so we have talked about governor limits. Now let's talk about next thing, which is called test methods. Okay, first of all, let's understand what is this concept of test. See, whatever epics we write, that needs to be tested before it can be deployed. Okay, so any apex that we have written, that apex needs to be tested before it can be deployed. Okay, so that's the simple logic. Deployed, when we talk about deployed, can be from sandbox to production. Deployed can be from one org to other org when we are talking about putting it as a package. Okay, so you always have to make sure that your apex is tested before you deploy it. Okay, so there's a simple concept which is called code coverage. Now what is this code coverage thing? Code coverage is okay. Before you understand code coverage, let me tell about this thing. Every apex method that you have written, okay, for every apex you will have to do a testing. Okay, so how that testing is done, that is done using these test methods. So against every apex method you will have to write an test method. Okay, when you write the test method, that test method will actually go and test that apex actual method, and based on the test it will give certain code coverage to your apex method. Okay, now that code coverage will provide will be given based on whether the apex code that you have written is okay or not. Okay, if Salesforce finds that your method, actual method, is okay, it will provide you code coverage for that. Okay, so if it is okay, it will give you the code coverage as 100%. If it is not okay, it will give you at 0%. If some lines are okay, some lines are not okay, then it might give you a 50%, right? Out of, let's say, 10 lines, if 5 lines of code are okay, then you will get a 50% code coverage. If out of 10, 8 lines are okay, so percentage wise, it will give you the code coverage, and you get 80% code coverage. Okay. Now to deploy anything to production, you need a minimum of 75% code coverage. Okay, which means if you have written 100 lines of code, you have to get code coverage for at least 75 lines. Got it? So if we are talking about 100 lines of code, we'll have to get the code coverage for at least 75 lines. You cannot have code coverage for just 50% and then you deploy. No, that does not happen. Okay. So how do we get code coverage? Let's see this. First of all, you will create a class. For example, text classes. So let us see them. Okay. So this is my actual method, right? This is the actual class and these are two methods. Okay. I want to get the code coverage for this. See, at this point of time, what is the code coverage that I have? 0%. Right? So to get the code coverage for this, first of all, you just go ahead and create one more class. So when any class has a code coverage of less than 75%, it cannot be deployed. So if you try to move it from sandbox to production now, it will not happen. Okay, it will say that it does not have the required code coverage. You come here and click on new. Okay, so any class that you are using for writing test methods should start with @isTest. Okay, you can avoid this thing, but the reason why we are writing this is the moment you write this, all the code that you write inside this will not be counted against the limit of the code that you have. You have a limit of 3 million characters. So again, I told you Salesforce puts limitation on everything. So they give you put a limitation of 3 million characters for epics that you can write. You must have seen that while you create your epics. So when you click on a new class, you will see that. See, out of allowed 3 million characters. So you have a limitation of this, alright? So out of this big limitation that you have, if you use @isTest for a class, whatever you are writing inside that class, that will not be counted against this limit. Okay, so anything that you are writing for test, please use this thing. Now start working normally. Public class C2 C test. So you can give it whatever name you want. The class name can be anything, doesn't matter. Okay. Now we want to test this, right? Mm, test method. One second. Making some syntax error. Hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have to, yeah, sorry. You can hear me now? Yeah. So you don't have to go and make this as a public method. You can just, make it, keep it as a normal method. That's it. So here, what we have done here, we have not done anything. We have just defined a class. A class is normal class, no such difference. Okay. We have defined a static void method. Okay. And you always have to define this test method keyword. Okay. If you don't define it as a test method keyword, Salesforce will not understand that it is a test method. Okay. So this is important. Okay. Now I have called an instance of C1. C1 is my class name, so I call an instance of C1. Define an instance of C1 as C1A equals new C1, and for that C1A I execute both the methods, get H1 and get A. These are the methods. Alright. Now this is my test method. So this test method will execute both the methods from C1 and it will test them. That's it. Fine. So that is what I have to do. Now how do I do the testing? Under develop you have Apex test execution. Okay, which class you want to execute for testing? This one. Okay, run. Okay. Now once you execute this, this will provide some code coverage to us. So it says 0 of 1 means I did not get a code coverage for this. So you can simply go to the Apex classes, go to C1 and check if you got any code coverage. 33% code coverage we have got. Okay, so we have not got 100%. So out of 3 lines, 1 line of code got covered. Right. So you can also check it in the developer console. Go to test, new run, select the class that you want to test. C1 is what you want to do the testing for. Run the test. Okay, and there is a tab for tests. So come to this tab. So overall you have 9%. Which class has got what, how much test code coverage? C1 is what we are worried about, right? So out of 6 lines, 2 lines are covered. So just double click and open it. It will show you which all lines are covered. So these 2 lines are covered, these lines are not covered. Okay, so we can just go back to our test class, test method, see if you're making any mistake there. Okay, let me just check the first one. So you can come to the developer console again. Run this. So that method we have returned this string hello. Okay. Okay. All right, I think we'll get back to this one. All right, and right. So what we're gonna do is I think I'll help you in this one, this testing. I might be making some small mistakes somewhere, I don't know, maybe in the syntax or somewhere. I'll just check and get back to you on this part. All right. So that is basically the concept. So what you have to do, you just have to, in the test method, you just have to execute the actual method thing. Okay. So once that gets executed, the way we got a code coverage here, we'll get a code coverage for our actual methods. Okay, so this time we got 33%. So you have to keep in mind, like whatever code you have, if you have 100 lines, 75 lines need to be covered. So you'll get close to 75% code coverage. Even if you do not have a 100% code coverage, it's fine, you can still deploy it, but a minimum requirement is always a 75%, not less than that. Here. So that is what we basically have in our test method. Okay, so exactly what is the error here, I can just check and let you know that thing can be done. All right, so tell me if we have any other questions or doubts here. Understanding the concept wise, we have understood the test method thing. Okay, how it is and how it works. Just that taking that code coverage to 75%, this should ideally be would have been 100%. Might be making some mistake, so I can check and let you know. But otherwise, from the concept perspective, are we clear? What is a test method? What is a code coverage? Why do we need a code coverage? What happens if we do not get a code coverage? We have understood that thing, right? So you will just create a separate class and put it as @is test annotation, and then you just need to go ahead and put stuff like you know test the actual method in the test method. That is what we have to do.
Actually, the class is compiling properly, right? Why it is saying like it's not like in the code coverage? Why it is showing less percentage?
No. Okay.
How they will calculate this code coverage?
Okay. So what happens is, one, there are two things. One is your actual method, okay, and one is the test method. Now your test method never commits something in the actual database or something like that. All right. So basically what happens with your test method is it only goes and checks your actual method, whether it works properly or does not work, or what is the problem and all that stuff, right? So this example, once we have put, there is a test method is also a method, right? So this test method actually does not perform anything, it just goes and tests the actual method. So when it goes and tests the actual method, if it finds that that method is not getting executed properly, then it would not give a code coverage for that. So in this case, what might be happening is the actual method that we have written, that method is not properly being executed. All right. So for that, it is throwing an error. All right. For example, if we make it like this and then we run our test, see, the moment you change that thing, it has got you 66% of code coverage. This was close. Okay, this part has still not changed. Zero failures, one passed. Okay, so that is not being covered because in the test class itself I have commented this out. No reason. Yeah. See, it gives you 100%. So actually this method is not doing anything as such. In this case, now what I see is the problem is with this record ID. The test method cannot fetch this record ID, does not get any data with the record ID. So that is the problem, right? So, that is what we have to just make sure that our test method is able to execute the actual method. Now, if you hard code the IDs, then definitely that's not the correct way of writing a code, right? So if you are on sandbox, your sandbox ID will be different from the production ID. So if you are hard coding an ID, that method will not be passed. So that is how it is, right? So test method never goes and performs any DML operation, neither it does fetch data from the actual database, nor it commits any data into the database. Nothing happens, it just checks whether that method can run successfully or not. The actual method that we are talking about, if that can run successfully or not. That is the only thing that a test method will do. Okay. So this is something which we'll need to always keep in mind, that test method will not have access to the actual database. It will not do anything in the database, it will not change anything in the database, and it will not even retrieve any data from the database. Okay. Here, so test method is only for checking whether the actual method is working fine or not and giving the code coverage. So that is how it works. Clear? Alright. So we have talked about quite a few concepts here. We have talked about synchronous, asynchronous epochs. We have talked about transactions. What all things have we talked about today? Someone please help me. I can scroll up the notebook, but let me see how much do we remember. So what all things did we talk? Synchronous. Okay, let's go line by line. So first was synchronous and asynchronous. So what are the different ways of synchronous epochs, invoking synchronous epochs?
Visual force, trigger.
Visual force, trigger, and anonymous code block, right? Okay. Then asynchronous epochs. What are the different ways of asynchronous epochs?
Future method.
Sorry. Future methods. Future methods.
schedule class.
Okay, schedulable apex, queuable apex, batch
Queuable
apex,
apex.
and batch apex, right? Those are all asynchronous. After that, we talked about transactions, right? Apex transaction. So what is an apex transaction? Can you quickly, can anyone quickly tell me what's an apex transaction?
Like a transaction is complete uh, when all the records are properly committed to database.
Right.
Otherwise, it will roll back.
So, I mean, what I feel is these are a few things, what we have discussed today, every bit of it is quite important, keeping in mind, your interview perspective. So, I would suggest that there are certain links that I have shared or I have, pointed out. So like what is an Apex transaction? So for Apex transaction, see, you can always have a question on what is an Apex transaction. A simple, simple question, what is an Apex transaction? And if you try to answer this from your own, I am 100% sure you will not be able to explain uh, as easy as you can explain using these two lines. So it's always good to take help of this. Okay, so though this is completely technology, but I want you to mug up a few things. Like this is one thing. Apex transaction is a common question. A lot of times it is asked during interviews and stuff. And if you just know this one line, which takes you 2 minutes to remember, you will be very safe during the interview, right? So when we try to explain it from our side, usually we try to say something and we end up saying something, and they will understand that we don't know what is the transaction. So it's always safe to have this line done as by heart. The transaction represents a set of operations that are executed as a single unit. The moment you say this, at least this much, so they feel, oh wow, the terminologies and every stuff, right? So same way when we are talking about governor limit. So say they ask you what is a governor limit. So if you use this line, because Apex runs in a multi-tenant environment, the Apex runtime engine strictly enforces a number of limits to make sure that Apex doesn't monopolize the resources. These are called governor limits. Right. Okay. The same way. This database.dml, okay, so you just have a small line here. So always, I mean, I would always suggest that have these small definitions of transaction, governor limit, because these are very common questions. I mean, interviewer know that they will ask these questions and people might not have the answers. You might understand what exactly a governor limit is, but you might not be able to explain it during the interview. So always good to go with this thing. All right. Okay. So transaction is one thing that we talked about, and after the transaction we talked about the DML operations. So there are two DML options, right? One is normal DML versus database.dml. What is the difference between DML and database.dml? How is DML different from database.dml?
The regular DML, it will roll back. The transaction fails in between.
For a regular DML, either the entire set of records will get processed or rolled back, right? For a database.dml,
If there is any error in between, it won't roll back whatever is already inserted or updated.
absolutely correct. So that is what. So this database.dml is a method from the. These are different methods from a custom class called database class. Okay, and we don't create it; it is already there. So that's there. Okay. And after that, order of execution. So in order of execution, we understood how data is committed into the database. What are the different steps? So it starts with the system validations, and before triggers, custom validations, after triggers, and then the OOTP functionalities. Finally, the data is committed to the database, right? So order of execution we talked about, governor limits we talked about, test methods we have talked about, right? Here, okay. So that's about the different things that we have done, or different concepts that we had to talk about. Now we are almost done with our syllabus of Apex, Visual Force and everything. So I want to do one more session with you guys, and that session I will use for two things. Okay, that will be the last session that we are going to do, and I want to do it after maybe a few days or something. In that session, there are two things which we want to do. One, I want to take any doubts that you have and talk about those. Okay. So any doubt, clarification, we can talk about those. And I want to, usually what I do is, I want to use that session for sharing a lot of reference with you. Okay. So where we end the session, say training is a part of learning, right? But it is not complete learning, right? From here on, you have to work on more things. You have to refer to different material, learn things on your own. Not just before the interview, after the interview, once you get into job, you again have to learn on certain things and all. So after this, what all things you will be doing, where all you will have to practice, what you have to do, and all that stuff. So I will guide you in that part. Okay. So that is one part of our next session discussion. The other part will be the doubts and stuff, right? So there are two things that I want to ask. One is, when do we want to keep it? Today being today is Monday, Tuesday. Today is Tuesday. Is it okay if we keep it on Thursday?
You mean for doubts or like
For doubts.
sharing the preferences?
No, we are going to do one session. In that session itself, we will do both these things. Okay.
So we are not having training sessions from now.
Yeah. So we will have one more session. That is what for reference and the doubt clearing, right? So because for doubts, I think you need a day to accumulate all your doubts, put it in an email, share it with me. So for that reason, I think we can do it tomorrow as well, ideally. But if we do it tomorrow, you guys will not have time to come up with all your doubts and questions. So you tell me by when you want to do it. I think Thursday should be a good option.
I prefer Monday.
Problem is, if we delay it too much, then you tend to not go through your doubts and all that stuff and don't come back. So I am okay with Monday also. I do not have a problem till the time you guys are okay.
Yeah,
And
actually, I was also thinking that there is too much to learn on Apex.
So spend some time, go through things, and if we are talking about Monday, then please try to share the stuff with me by Friday or Saturday. Fine. So do one thing, put your doubts in an email, send it to me before the before we meet on that particular session on Monday, right? So that while we are on the session, if both of you have the same doubts or the same questions, those can be addressed in the same at the same time. Okay, and we can have a structured discussion at that time as well. Got it? So let's keep it for Monday then. Just take your time, go through whatever we have discussed, and practice wherever you have doubt, question, queries, anything. Let me know, and we can definitely talk about that. Now, quickly before we wind up today's session, I think Ravi was asking something. Ravi, you were asking something on the Force.com IDE. Okay. Have you ever used Eclipse? Sorry.
Yeah, I have used Eclipse for Java.
You have Eclipse on your system?
Yeah.
You have Force.com IDE installed on that?
No.
Okay. So you just share your screen. Sandhya, have you used Eclipse ever?
No.
Eclipse is basically available on internet. You can download it for free. All right. So you just have to type anywhere on internet. I don't think you need it at this point of time, but in case at later point of time you need, you just have to write Eclipse for your operating system, whatever your operating system you're using, and you will be able to download Eclipse for free. Okay? Eclipse is something which is used for these Java developers to develop their projects and all that stuff. All right. So once you download it, it's gonna look something like this. The one you see on Ravi's screen. Ravi, can you share your screen? Yeah. So it has different versions. This is Eclipse Luna. You can maybe installing something else as well. Overall, the application is same for different things. You know, different
Actually, my concern was that developer org are only we are using for training, and
Mm-hmm.
in actual commercial purpose, nobody will be using developer org, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
You'll be using Sandbox.
whenever we are faced with coding, we would be either using Sandbox or Force.com IDE or Eclipse or whatever. So that's why I wanted to get familiar with all these.
Whether you have a Force.com ID installed on this.
I mean, this is for Java, right?
This is Java. Oh,
Yeah, this is Java.
okay. All right. So, okay. So, Sunday you saw this thing, na? So you will get that file. You just need to open. It will open something like this. Okay. Now you just need to go to Windows. No. Go to Help and click on Install New Software. So Eclipse is used for various development environments. Okay. So basically what we have to do is we just have to make sure that we are using Eclipse for
I type something there.
I'm just gonna share this link. You can do it later as well. Can you just open this link on your screen?
And like in developer org, all the classes we are writing are already deployed. So what about this Eclipse? When we write some class in Eclipse, we need to use it same as Sandbox, or it's already
No,
deployed
again, okay.
when we save the class?
Again, what I was saying earlier, let me repeat that again. Sandbox is a different concept. Eclipse is a different thing. Okay. Eclipse is not an alternate to the Sandbox.
Okay.
But my point, Sandbox is an environment. Developer org is an environment. Eclipse is just an IDE where you can write the code. Okay. So writing a code on Eclipse is as good as writing a code on a notepad. Till the time you do not put it or you do not connect it with a Salesforce org. Okay. So you cannot write use I think you just said again that thing, that if I do not have a Sandbox I will write it on Eclipse. See, if you do not have a Sandbox, then you can write it on a notepad also. So if you do not have a Sandbox, then writing a code on Eclipse is going to be as good as writing it on a notepad also. Does not make any difference, right? That is what I'm actually trying to say. So why do we need Sandbox? Because in Sandbox I can write the code and I just don't write that 5 lines of code. I can run that and check whether functionality is working fine or not, right? Eclipse does not have any such feature. Eclipse, as you saw, it's just an you just open the Eclipse Alright, close this. Once you install the Force.com IDE here, you will be able to click on File, New, and you can create Salesforce project. And then it will allow you to, like now you are able to create Java project here, you will be able to create a Force.com project. When you click create a Force.com project, you will be allowed to have, just give me 1 second, let me see if I have Eclipse. I must have used it a long time back. But if I have that, 1 second.
And we can take 1 month free trial of any Salesforce edition, and I believe one sandbox comes with that free.
With trial, I don't think there is any. Is it?
Yes, there's 1 month free trial for full Salesforce version. But
Oh,
we can only create one application and 10 custom objects or like that limitation.
but Sandbox also comes with that. I've never tried that trial thing. I've always used the developer edition. But
Yeah, I just read about that. It says that one sandbox comes with it, but I have never registered or tried that.
also just create a trial version of Enterprise Edition, and if it gives Sandbox also, that's good. Maybe
Yeah,
they have started giving it now, or they were giving it early, because I have never created a trial thing.
So is there will be like much difference between the sandbox and developer edition?
No
You can
difference.
feel. So except the URL, nothing else is different, right?
And there will be a Sandbox written at the top of it.
yeah, but
I
there
don't
will
have
be.
Eclipse here. So basically, see, what you see on Eclipse is, don't you think it's pretty similar to what we see on Developer Console? So alternate to an Eclipse is an alternate to the Developer Console. But the point is that Eclipse project that you are creating, let us understand. See, when I am creating a Salesforce project, understand the mechanism. That project is connected to some org, some Salesforce org. Okay. While you try to create a project, it will ask you to put a login ID, password, and stuff. Okay. So you will either select a sandbox org, or you are selecting a production org to create that project, right? And this class or trigger, whatever you are creating, is getting created on that particular environment, right? So it's not that you don't need a sandbox or you don't need any other org if you have an Eclipse. So that is a wrong concept. Alright? Yeah. Eclipse is a code editor, use it as a code editor, use it as a development environment. But that concept is not that correct or not that true, that if you have an Eclipse, you don't need a sandbox. Sandbox has its own importance. So Eclipse works more like a developer console. It used to work. Nowadays, most of the companies, they don't use Eclipse. So as I told you, I've also not been using it for quite some time. So in case you are asked a question on Eclipse, have you worked on Eclipse, you can always say that no, we have started using developer console, and our company enforces developer console to be used. And most of the times what happens is these Java developers are more comfortable using Eclipse. So the company says that no, you start using developer console, because developer console is a lot more easier and does not require any additional software to be installed in the system and all that stuff, right? Another good
So
thing
companies
with
use that developer console because the production org comes with developer console.
developer console comes with all the Salesforce orgs, production, sandbox, whatever it is.
Okay.
Fine. So sandbox and production is no difference. Let me show you the
I
sandbox.
I thought that developer console is only with developer org.
No. Developer org is for test org. I might have a sandbox login. Let me show you the sandbox login, and you guys will understand how it looks. Client login. I don't remember the password exactly. I think I should remember. Give me a minute. Let me log in and show it to you.
And one more thing I wanted to ask about the workbench, how important that is and where it is used.
Transaction workbench.
I think it's for circle queries writing. And
Okay. This is, yeah, I'll just come. Yeah, this is the sandbox. You see the name here? Do you see any difference from what we have worked on? The same, say, apps drop down, the same setup menu, same developer console, everything is there. There is no such difference.
yeah, the only difference will be the change set, right? It would have the option of
Outbound
creating
change set,
outbound
inbound
change
change
sets.
sets.
And
See that?
mm,
So because this is the sandbox, then I should do an outbound change set from here. When I'm in production, again I'll have this thing. So this deploy option is something which is not available in the developer edition. The rest everything is pretty similar. Everything is same. See, I told you, you can just go create a change set. So you just know the steps. You don't have to worry about anything. It's as simple as that. Fine. So now the point is that while you are writing a code on the developer console here, or if you're connecting your Eclipse with this particular org, then the triggers and classes that you create get created on this org. All right. So that is the thing. Advantage of creating something on the sandbox is I can test my trigger, I can test my class, I can check my Visual Force page here before I move it to the production, right? But you cannot test anything on Eclipse. Eclipse is not a Salesforce thing, right? It does not have records, it does not have anything. It's just a code editor, as good as a developer console. Console is still better than an Eclipse because developer console has access to the data. It can execute the SQL queries, anonymous code blocks, right? Right? It can do the testing. It can give me the code coverage then and there. So that is how it is basically. That's the concept. Right?
one more thing,
So
uh, like in the sandbox, we don't have the actual data of production data. So when we create triggers and effects classes, so for checking that, we need to create the data for testing.
you just create sample data on the sandbox also. No? You'll have to have
Okay.
sample data here and you will test your triggers and everything on that sample data, sample records. So our actual records will not be here.
And we can't use data loader in sandbox.
You can,
We can. Okay.
no, you can.
So
You
like
can
not
upload
all
the sample
companies
data, no
will,
problem. Yeah, you say something.
like not all companies will use this like data transfer from prod to sandbox, like a full copy or
So there is a
not
sandbox which
applicable.
is called a full copy sandbox, and the companies who have this. Achha, I'm already in sandbox. Okay. So the companies who have, who have a full copy sandbox, they will have that option. So that full copy sandbox, automatically the data gets synchronized between the production and sandbox. So that is where you don't have to use data loader. But if you want to put some sample data, you put it using data loader. Clear? So sandbox is nothing different. It's all the same thing. You asked whether you have worked on sandbox. Yes, I worked on sandbox. Everything I do on sandbox and I move it to the change set and then I import the change set on the production environment. That is what you can answer. That's pretty simple, right?
Jeet, do you also have some set of interview questions or